Hi, welcome to Not Another Killer podcast. Thank you for joining me here on this weekly podcast where I discuss crimes and killers from around the world. Nursery rhymes often have dark and dreary origins. Ring a Ring of Roses is debatably based around the Great Plague of the 1600s, or it could be about the Protestant dancing ban from the 1800s. Opinions seem quite divided on it. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, is thought to be derived from tales of Queen Mary I of England and her prolific execution of Protestants. And Jack and Jill is believed to be based on a tale of two unmarried lovers. Lizzie Borden is quite clearly telling a tale of parricide. And today's story is more of a recent tale of parricide which occurred in 2004, inflicted by a person with an extremely severe case of narcissism. Narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, is quite simply a person with delusions of grandeur. A narcissist can produce fantasies inside their heads and would do anything to make them a reality. And to be diagnosed as a narcissist, a person generally has to display 5 of the 9 following traits: needing constant admiration, expecting special treatment, having an inflated sense of self-importance and entitlement, reacting negatively to criticism, exaggerating achievements and talents, being preoccupied with fantasies about power, success and beauty, having an inability or unwillingness to recognise the needs and feelings of others, taking advantage of others, and behaving in an arrogant manner. It's basically a list of what not to look for in a partner. And it'll be interesting to see just how many traits today's case displays. Sidney Brian Blackwell was born in August 1932, and he met Jacqueline in the mid-1960s when they both worked as buyers for Littlewoods. It used to be a catalogue shop in England which went bankrupt in 2004. They still have a thriving website, but they no longer have brick-and-mortar stores. I used to love going in the Littlewoods Cafe every Saturday when I was a kid. They were both in separate marriages, and Brian had 2 sons. The pair ended up losing touch, but they were reunited in the early 1980s when Jackie returned to the area after a divorce. Both single now, they struck up a relationship and got married. After a few years of trying and a difficult pregnancy, Brian Blackwell, or Little Brian, was finally born in 1986, and he was raised in Melling, Liverpool. Brian was a very intelligent young man. He was a good student and a hard worker. He was nicknamed Brains by his parents because of his natural aptitude towards his schooling. He wanted to become a doctor, and his parents invested heavily in his education to help him towards his goals. He completed his A-levels at Liverpool College, a private institution costing £7,300 per year, and they set up numerous bonds and savings accounts in Brian's name to pay for his university education. Sidney and Jackie were extremely supportive of Brian's education, to the point of being extremely overbearing and strict. The difficulties that they encountered conceiving probably contributed to this. They were pushy with high aspirations for his future, and they didn't agree with Brian spending time with people his own age. They were constantly encouraging him to spend time with people more their age. Bear in mind they had Brian later in life. Sidney was now coming towards his early 70s and Jackie was in her early 60s. I have read that Jackie would bathe and dress Brian right up until his early teens, but I've been unable to verify the source, so pinch of salt in that one. The only external activity they encouraged was tennis. Brian was a good tennis player. He was captain of his college's tennis club, and he regularly played in the tennis club in the nearby town of Kirby. And this aptitude towards tennis would later, in a way, be the undoing of Brian and his parents. There were ongoing disputes between Brian and his parents around which university he would attend. They wanted Brian to attend Edinburgh University, which has one of the top 5 medical schools in the UK. But Brian wanted to attend Nottingham University, which has a decent medical school and also a decent sports section where he could continue to play tennis. Brian's father even notably phoned Edinburgh University to accept an offer, despite Brian having already accepted Nottingham. Regardless, Brian was under a lot of pressure from his parents to succeed, and he was adding to the pressure himself. He was very outgoing, he was self-assured, and began living in fantasies where he was more successful. He possibly started these fantasies as a way to escape from his life of living under his overbearing parents. He wanted to be seen as perfect, the best, and he began telling lies to fit his narrative of high achievement. In his head, he became a professional tennis player, the number 1 seeded youth player in the UK. He believed that he had the ability to become a professional player and seemed to believe that if he fantasized about it enough, it would eventually happen. He even, at one time, adopted a magazine rankings table to put himself at the top. He was in reality unranked. He seemed to be very much into the process of fake it till you make it, but instead of using the adage to sell makeup and imitation perfumes, he was using it to sell himself. Brian had a girlfriend named Amal Saba. They met when they both started Liverpool College and struck up a close friendship, which progressed towards a relationship in their final year. Amal is a sweet and relatively, at that time, naive girl who was swept off of her feet by the enigmatic, charming, seemingly successful Brian. Amal's friends and family were beginning to see through some of Brian's tales, and they seriously doubted that he was a famous up-and-coming young tennis player. But Brian was desperate to keep impressing Amal. After all, having a beautiful and adoring girlfriend on his side would have added to his fantasy narrative. He showered her with gifts, mainly moody jewellery, but he always claimed it was real and paid for by fictional tennis sponsorships. One time, Brian presented Amal with a large diamond-looking ring. Amal's mum, thinking this was a chance to expose Brian, asked for the receipt so that she could get the ring insured. Of course, Brian had lost the receipt. Brian became concerned that Amal would eventually see through his lies, so he decided to hire her as his PA/general manager on an £80,000 a year salary. And this seemed like an amazing opportunity for Amal, so she accepted the offer. I haven't been able to determine exactly what Amal was doing in this role, seeing as there was, in actuality, nothing to manage. But anyway, both of them were happy, and in April 2004, Brian decided to pay Amal an advance of £39,000, that's 6 months' salary, by cheque. But the cheque bounced. Obviously, because he didn't have the income to back it up. In fact, Brian only had £9 in his account at the time of writing the cheque. Brian had just been getting by so far by pilfering bits and pieces from his university funds. So anyway, Brian had to start making a lot of excuses for the cheque bouncing, and in so created another few little lies for her. Now, it wasn't an issue for Brian to keep on top of these lies, because he kept a record of everything that he told her. Yep. He kept his own little lie book and lie recordings. And the next few additions he made to these were whoppers. He claimed that he had just signed a new sponsorship deal with Nike for £70,000. The type of thing a PA general manager would actually be involved in. He also stated that he just bought an uptown apartment worth £500,000, that's $700,000 USD. And he had several famous footballers as neighbours. He strangely never took Amal to see his new flat, though. He also told Amal that he was buying a new car, despite not having a licence, and he took her around some showrooms that she could help him choose one. During the car showroom tour, Amal said that she'd quite like to buy a car herself. Brian offered to buy her one. Amal was understandably excited and super happy when in early May 2004 she received her Ford car. There was just one problem though. Brian didn't have the money to buy Amal a new car. Unfortunately, fictional money doesn't work in the real world, so he cashed in one of the bonds which his parents had purchased towards his education to finance it. Now, up until now, Jacqueline had been unaware of the small amounts of money that Brian was withdrawing from his trust funds, but her attention was obviously drawn to the £9,000 bond transaction. This was the first that his parents knew of Brian's spending habits, and it put pressure on an already strained relationship. Brian started faking more and more documentation to impress them all, and his notebook and conversation recordings lists were receiving more and more entries that he could keep up with all of these. He was certainly digging himself further and further in. Fearful that he may not be able to continue his life as a professional tennis player, he realised that he needed additional funds, and fast. He started going to banks pretending that he was a pro and started applying for loans and credit cards using his invented sponsorship deals as collateral. This, unfortunately, didn't work as his bank accounts told a different story. So, becoming desperate for cash, he started taking out credit cards and loans in his parents' names. He applied for a grand total of 13 credit cards in his father's name. Obviously, at some point, his parents found out. Probably when their credit scores plummeted due to the vast number of hard searches their accounts were receiving. And his parents were understandably angry. His mum visited their bank to cancel some of the applications in late June 2004, and their already stretched relationship was now edging towards breaking point. Brian told Amal that he was playing in a tennis tournament in Milan and he promised to take her, but then he backtracked and said that the tournament hosts weren't allowing friends and family to come along. So he took a week or so off of college and pretended that he was in Milan on this fictional tournament alone. And as a way of compensating for the Milan letdown, Brian told Amal that he had another tournament coming up, this time in Florida. And he said partners were allowed to come to this one, so he could take her there instead. Now, by this point, his lies really were all-encompassing. He had to find a way to get enough money to take Amal to Florida. People all around him were disbelieving of his lies, and he had barely no relationship with his parents. His fantasies were his obsession, his life, and he needed to be able to live out his dreams one way or another. On the morning of Sunday, July 25th, 2004, after hanging some pictures in his bedroom, Brian went online and booked business-class plane tickets to New York for him and Amal. He used his father's credit card to make the purchase. During Sunday lunchtime, Brian and his father took a trip to the tennis club where Sydney regaled the tennis club pals with stories of Brian's academic achievements and his pending A-level results. That was the last time that anybody outside of the family saw Sydney alive again. Sunday afternoon, Brian and his father returned home, where Sydney found out that his credit card had been used to book plane tickets that morning. Sydney put his foot down and refused to allow Brian to take the trip. Now, this sent Brian into an absolute panic. His fantasy was being threatened. Everything he had spent the last few years lying about and fantasizing about could all come crashing down if he couldn't take Amal on this trip. A large row then ensued between Brian and his father. Brian hit Sydney over the head with the rubber end of a claw hammer, the one which he had been using earlier on the day to hang pictures. And Brian stabbed him around 30 times with a carving knife. Forensics suggests that his dad was sitting at the start of the attack, but at some point had attempted to reach a window for help. His mum entered the room upon hearing the commotion, and Brian hit her over the head too, knocking her unconscious. Brian stabbed Jackie over the head and chest around